The next super global we're going to be discussing is post. So on the right here, from the last page on the php.net, let's click on the post. And as you can see, it also had its representation, which is now deprecated, was basically HTTP underscore post underscore vars. Don't worry about it, that's no longer in use. So just use underscore post. And what it does, and you can see it's pretty much the same description as we had for get. It's an associative array of variables passed to the current script via, this time, HTTP post method. So if we go back to our editor, continuing from our previous example, rather than having this get, I'm going to remove this add-in here to this get, and let's simply use underscore post this time. So I'm going to save the page, and I'm going to remove this link because that's not longer something that we're going to be using with post, because it's mainly the post is mainly being used with forms. There are some other more advanced ways of using it, but the form is going to be one of the most common basically ways that you're going to be using the post super global. So let's, now that we saved it, let's quickly go back to our browser. Let's refresh the previous page. As you can see, the array is empty at the moment. The post array is empty, even though we have query string, but we're not using get anymore, so obviously that is being ignored now completely. If I remove this, it's precisely the same thing. So what do we need to do in order to submit the form, and basically whatever data we put in, pass it onto this post super global array, or post request in other words? Well, the only thing that we need to do with the existing form is to convert this method from get to post. Now if we save it, go back to our browser, refresh the page first so that the form updates, and now if I type SSD tutorials and location, say United Kingdom, and if I hit submit, we have these items in the array, but as you can see in the URL, there's nothing new. Basically nothing has changed with our URL. So that is one of the main differences between a post and get. With the get, we have to have this query string in the URL. With the post, that does not happen. But what happens when we use post, if I now try and refresh this page, look what's going to happen. The browser is going to say, basically, do you want to resend this information, in other words, basically, which you did, because every time when you post the form to the given URL and then you want to refresh this data, you're basically resending the same data which you've submitted through the form to the same page that you've basically posted them to. So that's what you might be seeing very often when you're refreshing the page after submitting the form using the post method. So if we go back to our editor, exactly same way as with get, we can add to the array. So if we just use post, let's say time, and let's add to it again, same time as we did before, 1945 I think it was. Let's save it, go back to the browser, refresh the page. Yes, we want to resend it. As you can see, even though we didn't have this field, this time field in the form, because we added this manually, it's also added to this post super global. Now if we go back to the editor, we can unset some items, you can override them. So let's quickly unset, let's say unset post, and we're going to unset school, save it, go back to our browser, refresh it again. We are resending the data. Now school has been removed and we only have location because we obviously use this unset function. Another thing is we can obviously overwrite it. So let's quickly remove this unset equals, and if we just put some other school, save it, preview in a browser, refresh the page, resend the data, and there we go. Even though we've submitted obviously different data, it's now been over. As you can see, it's precisely the same way as what we had with the get super global. It's just that it uses different method. Obviously URL is cleaner because we don't have to use any query string, and all the data obviously is submitted in a slightly different way. But still, when we are fetching it, when we add into this array, it's exactly the same way as with the get super global. We could obviously post this data to a completely different page. Rather than going to the existing page, we could add form action. There we go, and let's say go to about about.php, and this is where basically all this data would be posted. In other words, our about page basically would receive the values which we've submitted through this form. But let's try something different. For the action, I'm going to use actually the query string. So we're going to be able to use both methods, the get and the post. So let's say I want to use the ID of 2 with this specific request. So I'm going to post ID via the get query string, and I'm going to submit school and location via post. And what I'm going to do before we actually show anything from a get, let's just have a look at how the form is going to work. So if I just reload the page, so rather than refreshing the page, I'm placing my cursor in the URL field and hitting enter, so we're clearing everything. But obviously the school has been added manually. We probably can remove this from this example, and if we go back, let's refresh the page now. We have our empty array. Let's try again. SSD tutorials for school and location United Kingdom. And if I now click on submit, look at the URL, submit, there we go. Because our action did have this query string, this is where the form has been submitted to. Basically, it used this action, so it added the get request, plus we also submitted the data through the post using obviously the post method. If I refresh again, we're sending the data, but again to the same action, to the same URL which was specified for the action. Now let's go back to our editor and see what we can actually do with this. So we know that we have get ID here. What we can do is add this basically this get request to our post request, add them together, basically merge the arrays, in other words. So let's quickly create a post get variable, and let's use array underscore merge, and let's first use our post super global, and then let's use our get super global. So basically we are merging both of these arrays, these super global arrays, to get just one. And we are going to basically output all of the values associated with both post and get requests. So if we now go back to our browser, refresh the page, so we're resending the data, and there we go. As you can see, because the first item in this merge array was the post super global, so the first 2 items are coming from the post using this form, obviously, with the post method. And then the get super global, which basically fetched this query string from the URL with the ID of 2. So we basically have this specific array contains post and get super global values. Now just to finish this video, let's quickly have a look at this about. Basically, if we try and post to another page, so let's do it about.php, and obviously we need to create this page. So in our project folder, I'm just going to create a new PHP file called about.php, and inside of this file I'm basically going to copy what we have here. I'm just going to, well, let's cut it from this index and paste it inside of the about.php page, because this about.php only contains PHP code. We can remove the closing PHP tag. As you can see, if I reverse it, I get this squiggle in my editor. It tells me that obviously we don't really need this closing tag because there's only PHP code in this file. So if I now go back to my browser, let's just go back to the main page. We only see the form, obviously, because we removed the output block and moved it to the about.php file. So let's quickly put in SSD tutorials again for the school location United Kingdom, same thing. And if we submit the form, as you can see, we are now being redirected to the about.php file. When we get in this ID equals 2 query string, which was basically part of the action. This whole string here basically is the action which we put for the form. And obviously we've got our post data plus the data from the get request, everything the same way as we had on the previous page. The only difference is now we are on a different page. As you can see, we could pass data from one page to the other using post as well as the get super globals.